The conservative GOP attack on our democracy did not end in January 2020. It has continued. In fact, conservatives are planning to level it up. I'll explain in just a minute. Hello, everyone. This is Attorney Augustus Corbett, a.k.a. the Minister of Justice. I am one half of the Defiant Lawyers. Each and every week, we bring you a legal analysis of some story trending about politics, policies, personalities, or pop culture to empower you with the information you need to defy an unjust legal system and to nullify systemic racism. If that interests you, please subscribe, like, share, comment, and click the bell so you'll get notified when we upload one of these awesome videos. I hope you're doing very well. I hope you had a good day. I hope you've had a good week so far. I have, although I've been dealing with some minor coughing and sneezing and so on. I guess it's the change of the weather, but whatever it is, I'm going to get through it, and I appreciate your well wishes and your prayers. But anyway, duty calls, and I need to talk to you about Project 2025. Project 2025. It's beginning to circulate a little bit. Folks are beginning to ask, what is Project 2025? And it's a little bit surprising that more people do not know what Project 2025 is, since the Heritage Foundation has been talking about it, and it's all over their website. Conservatives are planning this tremendous government takeover, but it takes a while for things to sort of get around to the American public. So it's beginning to make its way around the country. And again, folks have begun to ask me what it is. And so I thought this would be the appropriate time to do a video on Project 2025. As the title of this video says, it is an existential threat to our democracy. Again, Project 2025 is an existential threat to our democracy, at least as we know it. Now, existential threat means it threatens the existence of our democracy, literally. And you'll see what I mean when I get into a little bit of what the conservatives are planning for our country, especially if Trump or some other conservative wins in 2025. That's why it's called Project 2025. Okay, so it is literally a takeover of the government and a dismantling of certain parts of the government. So let's talk about it a little bit. I'm not going to take a lot of time talking about it because they have really laid it out, and it would require more time than I have in this video. But let's take a brief look, an introductory look. I'll be doing more videos on what Project 2025 is all about in later videos. But for now, let's go to the Heritage Foundation website. The Heritage Foundation is a conservative think tank that has been around, as they say on their website, for about 50 years. Driving and spearheading the conservative movement in this country. And so they have come up with Project 2025. And so let's read a little bit of what their goals are here. So this says, with the Biden administration half over and with the immediate dangers inherent to one-party rule in Washington behind us for now, it's past time to lay the groundwork for a White House more friendly to the right. Not friendly to the American people, whether right, left, or center. No, to the right. For decades, as the left has continued its march through America's institutions, conservatives have been outgunned and outmatched when it comes to the art of government. One reason is because the Republican establishment never moved on from the 1980s. Now, what happened during the 80s? Well, Ronald Reagan. That's what happened during the 80s. Ronald Reagan was president from 1981 to 1988, 89, about 8 years. I remember very well. And he was as conservative as they come. In fact, I remember when former President Reagan he started his campaign like Trump. You remember Trump started his campaign coming down the escalators, I think, in one of his hotels, and began to say some very disparaging things about Mexicans. We all remember that. Well, Ronald Reagan did something equally offensive. He started his campaign in, I believe it was Money, Mississippi, where Emmett Till had been murdered. Yes, he literally did that. So he was sending a strong message to the Confederates, to white conservatives, to white supremacists, that he was definitely one of them. And that's exactly what Trump did. So here, the Heritage Foundation is saying they did not move on from the 80s. They did not move on from the Reagan administration. And Reagan really changed things. I'm old enough to remember it very well. The 80s were right after the 70s, and the 70s were a pretty decent time for African Americans. There was a lot of African American pride in the air. There was the time of big afros and high platform shoes and say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. Well, the backlash for all that black pride and black power was Ronald Reagan. And the backlash for 8 years of the first black president is Donald Trump. Okay? So you see the parallels? Every time there is some movement to move the African American community forward, there is some backlash, some harsh backlash to try and put that genie back in the bottle, so to speak. So that is, in a nutshell, what Project 2025 is all about. And yes, it is centered around one man, Donald J. Trump. Donald Trump. Okay, if he is reelected with all of his criminal charges and indictments and impeachments and grievances and so on, they plan to hit the ground running. Project 2025 is their effort to hit the ground running. So let's go back to the Heritage Foundation's website. One reason is because the Republican establishment never moved on from the 1980s. Beltway conservatives still prioritize supply-side economics and a bellicose foreign policy above all else. Belief in small government, strangely enough, has manifested itself in a belief among some conservatives that we should lead by example, not fill all political appointments. Belief in the primacy of the national security state has caused conservative administrations to defer political decisions to the generals and the intelligence community. The result has been decades of disappointment. They go on and say some other things here, basically, again, expressing their grievances and their desire to take control and get in power over the federal government. And they have basically broken down this Project 2025 into 4 areas. Let's look at them. The first pillar, the upcoming production of the policy book Mandate for Leadership. The second is our online personnel database. The third is our Presidential Administration Academy. And the fourth and final pillar of the Project 2025 is our playbook. So you see they got these 4 pillars here. First, there's the Mandate for Leadership book, which is a policy book. The second is the personnel database, which will consist of all these conservatives, primarily white conservatives, Some blacks, as long as they are willing to promote white supremacy, black conservatives can be a part of this as well. And then the third pillar is, again, the Presidential Administration Academy, which will teach the president and all his or her men what to do on day one to start moving their conservative agenda into the American society. The fourth and final pillar, again, is their playbook, where they start trying to implement the policies that are written in the book, Mandate for Leadership. Now, let's go a little deeper here, because they have some specific goals of dismantling certain federal agencies. And let me show you what I mean by that, because Mr. and Mrs. Smith are coming, and they're coming to take over. So what particular government agencies do they have in their minds specifically? Well, the Department of Education, the mission of Project 25 regarding the Department of Education says, federal education policy should be limited, and ultimately, the Federal Department of Education should be eliminated. That is really, 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 really extreme and radical. Eliminate the Department of Education. Now, I'll talk about why in just a moment. When power is exercised, it should empower students and families, not government. In our pluralistic society, families and students should be free to choose from a diverse set of school options and learning environments that best fits their needs. What are they saying? Let me interpret it for you. Well, just go back to Brown versus Board of Education. That's all you got to do. Brown versus Board of Education overturned Plessy v. Ferguson, which mandated separate but equal schools. Brown overturned that, and to their chagrin, to their disappointment, grave disappointment, white and black students were then forced to sit together in schools, learn together, and so on. They never liked it. They never accepted it. They never believed in it. They never embraced it. So what did they do? They sent their kids to private schools, right? They started developing these private schools, these so-called Christian academies, and sent their kids to those schools. And now what they're saying is, we should be able to do that with the money that the federal government spends in education. So give us that money so we can pay for our children's private education in some predominantly white private school, basically. That's what this is all about. Just go back to Brown versus Board of Education. That's it. I mean, this is just birth out of white supremacy. It's birth out of racism. I don't believe in sugarcoating it. I'll just tell it like it is. That's what this is about. That is precisely what this is about. Wanting to put their kids in schools away from African-American children primarily, and wanting the government to cover the bill. And what's that going to do? That's going to essentially defund public education. Now, I wrote a book on this, in fact. Let me see if I can put my hand on. I literally wrote a book on this. Let me see if I can get it. Right here. Let me go to my large screen here. But yeah, right here, I wrote a book, Education and Justice. Right here. I talk about every bit of this in my book, Education and Justice. Get your copy. Go either to InPartPublishing.com or you can go to Amazon. I prefer you do it through InPart Publishing so we don't have to share any of the royalties with Amazon. But if you prefer to do it through Amazon, feel free. But yeah, go back to Brown versus Board of Education, go back to Jim Crow, go back to segregation. That's what they want. And they want federal taxpayer dollars to fund it. But not just the Department of Education. What else? What other agency have they set their sight on? Well, this one, the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice has a long and noble history. That history began with the creation of the Office of the Attorney General pursuant to the Judiciary Act of 1789 and has continued through the creation of the department in 1870, the formation of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in 1908, reforms following the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, and to the present day. Properly understood within the framework of a constitutional republic that values ordered liberty, the Department of Justice has two primary functions: protecting public safety and defending the rule of law. Oh boy, the rule of law, defending the rule of law. And yet they want Donald Trump to become the president, a man who has no regards for the law. None. Yet here they're talking about defending the rule of law, and they want a man in office who sees nothing wrong with violating every law so long as it gets him what he wants. Unfortunately, the department has lost its way in recent years and has forfeited the trust of large segments of the American people. In fact, speaking of Donald Trump, if he gets back in office, he is going to seriously weaponize the Department of Justice, and he's going to go after everybody who's trying to hold him accountable. Alvin Bragg, Joe Biden. Who else? Letitia James. Who else? Fonnie Willis. The special prosecutor handling the documents case, the classified documents case. Is it Joe Smith? I can't remember. Please forgive me. But whatever his name is, oh boy, Trump is going to pick up the phone. First, he's going to put, some stew pigeon in office over the Department of Justice, and with the understanding, go get every one of those people who tried to hold me accountable. I want them indicted. I mean, he said as much. He doesn't even hide it. So when they talk about the rule of law, defending the rule of law is laughable. So they go on to say large swaths of the department have been captured by an unaccountable, bureaucratic, managerial class and radical left ideologues who have embedded themselves throughout its offices and components. Why are they saying that? Let me tell you why they're saying that. They're saying that because it was the Department of Justice that forced white conservatives to stop voter suppression before they gutted the Voting Rights Act. It was the Department of Justice that forced them to stop trying to intimidate black students back when the black kids and families were trying to integrate the education system. It was the Department of Justice under Robert F. Kennedy and other administrations that have tried to stop white conservatives from exercising white supremacy and racism and systemic racism. Now, let me be the first to say, as a criminal defense attorney, civil rights attorney, I have somewhat of a love-hate relationship with the Department of Justice. There are times when I'm very strongly in support of the Department of Justice, as, for example, when those 3 men murdered Ahmaud Arbery. It was the Department of Justice under Kristen Clark, a brilliant and tremendous assistant, I forgot her formal title, but she's over the Civil Rights Division. And she has been instrumental in using the Department of Justice to bring about civil rights cases where appropriate. And that's what they don't like. She's one of those left ideologues that they're talking about. Someone who is simply, again, trying to prevent civil rights violations in our nation. To them, she is one of those radical ideologues. Now, when Trump was president and he had Jeff Sessions and Bill Barr over the Department of Justice, everything was fine because those men, for example, Jeff Sessions got rid of all the dissent decrees over rogue police departments. William Barr, of course, did everything Trump said until the very end. So the Department of Justice was their friend then. But when DOJ is trying to fight racism and civil rights violations and voting rights violations and housing violations and all other types of violations, then they want it gone. The same is true with the Department of Education. Oh, let me not forget the Department of Education. It is extremely important, the Department of Education. All of the, I write about it in my book, all of the discrimination that Black male students in particular and and Black female students as well experience in public schools. The Department of Education is there to ensure that does not happen. So why do they want to get rid of it? Because they want education to be controlled by the locals that we have seen in various states who will not even allow history to be taught correctly. They want that crowd. Remember Mr. and Mrs. Smith? They want Mr. and Mrs. Smith controlling education, not the Department of Education. So they are attacking the Department of Education. And if they get in office, they're telling us we're going to dismantle the Department of Education. Why is that, Mr. and Mrs. Smith? Well, the truth is, no matter what they say, in their minds, it doesn't serve their purpose. They're so radical, so woke, so interested in equality and fairness for African American and Latino students that they're no good anymore and we need to get rid of it. That's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a threat that is much more serious than what we saw in January of 2020 when those folks stormed the Capitol building. I think it was January 2020. What we're dealing with now is much worse. They have changed up. They're saying, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to storm the building and a bunch of conservatives get locked up because the Department of Justice is so lefty now. No, we're going to get Trump elected or one of those other conservatives elected, and we're going to take over intellectually. We're going to take over politically. We're going to take over by using the law or changing the law or just disregarding the law. Project 2025, I'm trying to tell you, is an existential threat to our democracy as it stands. The thing that has made America exceptional and great is because of its institutions. They don't always get it right. And certainly we African Americans have been on the wrong side of those institutions many times. It's the reason we believe that there is institutional racism because of a lot of those government agencies that I'm sitting here now in defending, like the United States Department of Agriculture, which helped cheat many, many, many African American farmers out of their farmland. So I am not sitting here saying that these federal agencies ought to be trusted and so on. No, because oftentimes, instead of being filled with these leftists that these conservatives are talking about, they're oftentimes filled with white conservatives who do African Americans a disservice. But the country is still better with these federal agencies than without them. The Department of Education. I've had issues with the Department of Education. And as I said, certainly with the Department of Justice and the Department of Agriculture and others. I could go on and on, EPA. But our institutions are what makes our democracy tick. We just need to get fair-minded people in those agencies, not these radical conservatives who are coming from all over the country, carrying Trump's water and full of his grievance and his anger. No, that'll move us toward a country that could very well implode. That's not what we want. Not at all. Project 2025 is intended to create just that kind of place. So, what is their biggest beef with the federal government? The federal government has, for decades, been there to try and protect the civil rights of African Americans, from the federal court system to the Department of Education to the White House, depending on who is in the White House. And it's always been this, back and forth, this rift between white conservatives and the federal government. And it goes back to the Civil War, right? It was the federal government that came in and made southern states in the enslavement of African American people. So this has been good, this fight, these conservatives trying to dismantle the federal government has been going on for years and decades, several centuries, you could say. So it's not anything new, but we do need to be woke to it, pun intended. We need to wake up and see exactly what's going on. And any black conservative who's a part of this and trying to basically help these folks set up a white supremacist, white fascist state, shame on you. Shame on you. You don't have to be a Democrat. You don't have to be liberal. You don't have to like Joe Biden. But to help these folks set up this sort of white ethno-state, this what could easily become a white fascist state, something like Germany, come on. Shame on you. All right. Those are some of the comments I wanted to make on this Project 2025. You're going to hear more about it from me and from others, and I encourage you to do your own research, and so that you can stay abreast of what they're planning to do. If they can get their guy, Trump, or some other conservative in office, elected in 2024, Project 2025 will come to life, and most of us are not going to like what happens. Okay. I am Attorney Augustus Corbett. Thank you for listening, and you have a wonderful rest of your week. Peace. I put out my first video about Project 2025 over 7 months ago, and now people are just beginning to catch on how dangerous Project 2025 really is. Well, today I'm going to go deeper and show you how Project 2025 will unleash much more virulent, anti-Black, racial discrimination. Stay with me. Hello, everybody. I am Attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers, and each and every week we bring you at least one legal analysis of some trending story regarding politics, policies, personalities, or pop culture to empower you with the information you need to defy an unjust legal system. If that interests you, and I certainly hope it does, it really should in a day like today. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell so that you'll get notified when we upload one of our powerful and informative videos. So we're going to talk about how Project 2025 will unleash much more virulent, anti-Black racism. That's what I want to talk with you about today. Please go get a copy of my book, Education and Justice: How Public Schools Fail African American Male Students. I assure you, if your kid, your son especially, is in public schools, they are failing him in multiple ways that you probably don't even realize until it's too late. In this book, I tell you how they're doing this and what you can do about it. Also, we started, as you know, a program called BARS, Black America Reading Strongly. The program started June 1st, and already people have enrolled and registered their sons in this program, and it is doing well. Those young men are reading books and their parents are excited, and we're excited at what is happening. Please, if you have a child, a son especially, that is not reading at grade level, go and register. Go to our website at lljp.org, okay? We want to see a whole lot more young boys in this program because we want to get the reading scores of African American male students way up. The numbers show that African American male students typically read below their grade level. We want to correct that, all right? So go and enroll your child. All right, so with that said, Project 2025 is starting to get some traction. Hey everyone, I am Attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. Recently, I took a look at our analytics and I noticed something shocking. Many of you watch our videos and I believe you enjoy them, but you haven't subscribed yet. What are you waiting for? Again, I was shocked because I know our content is empowering and informative. Plus, our 2024 goal is to have 150,000 subscribers before the end of the year. Please help us by hitting that subscribe button, especially you young folks. We particularly want to increase our number of young subscribers. Thanks for all your continued support. We appreciate it very much. Again, I did my first video on Project 2025, again, 7 months ago. 7 months ago. And now I understand, even last night, I didn't watch the BET Awards, but I was told that Taraji P. Henson actually told folks, because she was the host, I think, that they need to get up to speed on Project 2025. Now, the problem with getting up to speed on Project 2025 is they have released a 932-page manual. That's almost 2 reams of paper. That's that thick, okay? Most people don't have the time to read something like that, and some of what you read is very legal, is very technical, and most people probably couldn't understand some of it anyway. So I've taken it upon myself to go into the deeper parts of Project 2025 and share with you what I believe are the most problematic provisions for African American people in Project 2025. So what I want to do today is I want to share with you a little bit about something called disparate impact. Disparate impact. All right, so we're going to go and see exactly what disparate impact is and why it will definitely enable and unleash much more racial discrimination against Black Americans. So I say right here, the conservative movement has initiated Project 2025, a highly structured and well-financed campaign with an agenda that opposes democracy and civil rights. 7 months ago, I created my initial Project 2025 video when most people seemed oblivious to its threat. In the upcoming Project 2025 videos, I will explore in more detail and highlight particular dangers faced by African Americans from Project 2025. And the thing to remember about Project 2025 is that its policies have been around at least since the Reagan administration, because the policies were developed by this organization called the Heritage Foundation, again, which came into fruition in the early years of the Reagan administration. All right. And today that organization is led by this man, Kevin Roberts, Dr. Kevin Roberts. He's president of the Heritage Foundation. And what the Heritage Foundation did back during the Reagan administration was developed Reaganomics, if you will, develop sort of a Reaganism sort of approach to government, and then dispersed those policies from Reagan's policies around to conservatives around the country. So what these folks intend to do is to institutionalize Trumpism. They want to make Trumpism the standard bearer for the conservative movement. And we see that taking place in the Congress, in the courts, in the Supreme Court. Just today, we got this immunity case down from the Supreme Court. I will be doing a video. In fact, I think I'm going to go live and talk about that. And by the time you get this video, I may have already done so. So just if you missed it, go and watch the replay of the live if I do it live. I think I'm going to do it live. So they want to institutionalize Trumpism, and they're using the Supreme Court now that they have 6 conservative members on the court. They're using Congress to the degree that they can, state legislatures, churches, and so on, to codify, if you will, to memorialize, to make Trumpism the standard for conservatives, whether he win or lose. So what they're trying to do is really dangerous, very dangerous. And I got many videos planned to explain to you exactly how they are trying to do this. And as I said in the opening, they are well-financed and well-organized and have been around a long time. So they know how to get their agenda done. And those who oppose Project 2025, we're not that organized, unfortunately. We're not that well-funded. And so typically they're able to get their agenda done because our opposition is not as effective as what they're doing. Well, I'm going to do my part. I'm going to do my part. In fact, we're going to be introducing some merchandise soon, so that you can start purchasing this merchandise and wearing it and promoting our fight to defend civil rights and to fight Project 2025. All right, so Kevin Roberts is the leader of the Heritage Foundation, which gave birth to Project 2025. And what you see on the screen now is the manual, that 932-page manual that they've written that covers a whole host of things. I have been scouring that document, and there's one thing that I want to share with you today about what they intend to do, which will definitely unleash a lot more anti-Black racism. All right, let me explain what I'm saying. So disparate impact. Disparate impact is probably a word you've never heard in your life, or a term that you've never heard in your life. In that manual that I just told you about, let me quote these words. Courts have ruled that even without evidence of overt, intentional discrimination, such results might suggest discrimination. This doctrine of disparate impact could be ended legislatively, or at least narrowed through the regulatory process by a future administration. So, Dr. Roberts here is saying that they want to see the disparate impact doctrine done away with, like they did DEI, like they did affirmative action. Because disparate impact, we litigators, practitioners, civil rights litigators, we use disparate impact to prove our civil rights cases all the time. Because quite often when we bring these lawsuits, these civil rights lawsuits, we don't have intentional discrimination or overt discrimination. We as Black Americans know we don't have to be called the N-word to be discriminated against. We know that, having been the victims of discrimination all our lives. We know that racists nowadays are much more smarter and wiser than to use a racial slur. Nonetheless, they discriminate against African Americans all the time. And you see, what the law requires is that you show that the discrimination was intentional. And again, short of somebody calling you the N-word, it is very, very difficult to prove that the discrimination was, in fact, intentional. So the law allows us to show disparate impact. Disparate impact means that we can show that Blacks disproportionately have been affected by this type of discrimination. And that then shows the intent of the discrimination. So it's a way to sort of get around the fact that intentional discrimination is very, very hard to prove. If we can show that enough Blacks have suffered some injury or some damages because of a particular type of discrimination, then that meets the disparate impact doctrine. Well, they want to get rid of that so that a civil rights lawsuit will be dismissed by a judge unless you're able to show just some overt, intentional racism. And again, that's hard to do nowadays. Now, let me give you an example so that you can see exactly how this plays out in court. Meet Rhonda. She is a real estate investor who buys and flips houses. Recently, she sold a home she bought before the pandemic and made a nice profit. The money from the sale was deposited into her Bank of America account. A few days later, Rhonda went to the bank to withdraw $27,000 to invest in another deal. Despite being a loyal customer for 15 years, the manager refused her request for no legitimate reason. Rhonda tried another branch the next day. This time, the teller asked her for her driver's license to verify her identity. After showing her ID, the teller still refused and called the supervisor. The supervisor confirmed Rhonda was the account holder, but started asking offensive questions like, "Where did you get this money?" Rhonda refused to answer the question, and the branch manager was called. The manager also asked offensive questions. Frustrated and knowing she was being racially profiled, Rhonda asked why. They responded by calling the police, who verified her identity, but the bank still didn't honor her request. Now let's stop there. Rhonda, a legitimate real estate investor, sold a house, made a nice penny on it. The money was deposited in her bank account, and so then she wanted to use some of that money to buy and flip another house. So she went to her bank that she had been banking with for 15 years and said, "Hey, I'd like to withdraw $27,000. She went through all the protocols. She showed them her ID, put in a PIN number, all that you have to do. And lo and behold, they refused to give her the money. So she left that bank. That was one day. She left that bank. Next day went to another bank, figuring, okay, maybe, the teller had a bad day or something. Same thing happened at the second bank. Very same thing happened again. But this time, they called the police and asked her a bunch of offensive questions. Where did you get this money? Something that never happens to whites. Not those kind of offensive questions. Okay? So that is what happened in my scenario here. Let's go back and see what happened. It took Rhonda 2 months to get her money through a wire transfer. She just got discouraged, didn't want to go back, so instead of showing her face, she decided to do it through a wire transfer. In other words, this is banking while black. That's what she dealt with. She hired a law firm and sued the bank under a civil rights law from 1866, now known as 42 USC Section 1981. We bring these lawsuits all the time under Section 1981. Now watch this, as I just said. No one called Rhonda the N-word. No one said to Rhonda, we don't give this much money to black people. That didn't happen. That has happened with other litigants, other plaintiffs, but that did not happen in this case. But in order for her lawsuit to progress and in order for her to win it, the law requires that she shows intentional discrimination. That is really, 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 really hard. Really hard. Because like in the example that I just gave you, she couldn't show that anyone again called her the N-word or mentioned her race, but she knew that's what it was about. And we as African Americans know that that's what that was about, because no one would do that to a white person. Probably would never do that to an Asian person, maybe a Latino person, but not to a white person. Probably not to an Asian person. So she knows this discrimination, racial discrimination, banking while black, racial profiling. Absolutely. But the law lifts that standard so high, she has to show intentional discrimination. But there is an exception, and that exception is if Rhonda can show disparate impact, which means, can Rhonda show that other similarly situated black Americans have experienced the same type of banking while black? And guess what? Just a simple Google search will show you many blacks have dealt with the same type of discrimination, including famed director Ryan Coogler, right, who directed the film Black Panther. So it happens quite a bit. So one may be able to show disparate impact without showing that someone used the N-word when they denied this black person their withdrawal or discriminated against them in some other way. All right, now, notice these types of lawsuits come under 42 USC Section 1981, which is a civil rights law that was actually enacted back in the 1860s for the benefit of African Americans. And essentially it says that corporations must enter into contracts and enforce those contracts as it does with white people in the same way. So when you go, for example, to buy a car, to lease an apartment, to buy a house, to do business at your bank, to do business at Walmart, or some other place where a contract is established, they got to treat you the same way that they treat whites. Otherwise, you can bring a Section 1981 lawsuit against them. Now, the issue is, as soon as you file the lawsuit, the other law firm is going to file a motion to dismiss and say that you did not present any facts to show intentional discrimination. And our response is, well, we don't have to, because we will show disparate impact. We will show that other blacks have been treated just this way. And that then will get us around the intentional discrimination requirement or standard. Well, Project 2025 intends to get rid of disparate impact. Doing so would make it easier for corporations to racially profile black people in various areas like employment and housing and many, many, many other ways. In other words, the impact of getting rid of disparate impact would be devastating for black Americans, because corporations will say, we don't care that you file a lawsuit because you can't prove intentional discrimination, and because of Project 2025, Congress has gotten rid of the disparate impact doctrine. So what is that going to do? It's going to do just what the title says. It's going to unleash more racism in this country. That is just one of the specific threats that Project 2025 poses for Black Americans. So, right here, Dr. Roberts, Kevin Roberts, in that mandate for leadership, it says, quote, courts have ruled that even without evidence of overt intentional discrimination, notice it doesn't say courts have ruled that even without evidence of discrimination, but overt intentional discrimination. That's the hurdle. That is the hurdle, and it's a very high hurdle. Such results might suggest discrimination. This doctrine of disparate impact could be ended legislatively. That means Congress can kill it, like they've done the Voting Rights Act, or at least narrowed through the regulatory process by a future administration. So if Trump gets in office, this will be on the list of things that Project 2025, Dr. Roberts, and the Heritage Foundation wants the Trump administration to accomplish. And it's just one of many. One of many. I got more videos coming this week actually, showing you how Project 2025 specifically targets African Americans in many ways. And when you understand what Project 2025 is intending to do and see how that agenda is being implemented through SCOTUS, through they want the White House, through Congress, through state legislatures, wow. 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 It is very serious. So let me close by saying this. As I said in my live presentation just after, I think a day after the debate, for me, it doesn't matter if Joe Biden had been wheeled in a wheelchair into the debate and he fell out the wheelchair, fell on his face and couldn't get up. It wouldn't matter with me because I still would vote for Joe Biden. Not only because of the policies that Biden and Harris have put forth that have benefited Black Americans, but because of what Project 2025 and these folks want to do to African American people, people just like this. Trump, Dr. Kevin Roberts, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Speaker Mike Johnson, and millions of others. Millions of others. One of the things that Project 2025 want to do, and I'm going to talk about this in another video, is they want to fire thousands of people who work for the government and replace them with extreme right-wing conservatives, just in civil service type jobs, just government type jobs. This is what they're planning to do. We got to stop it. We got to ensure that Biden wins this election because Project 2025 is awful. I am Attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. Thank you for tuning in. And as always, please like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell so that you'll get notified every time we upload one of these powerful and informative videos. Until the next time, peace. There is a lot more about Project 2025 I need to tell you. Stay with me. Hello, everybody. I am Attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers, and each and every week we bring you at least one legal analysis of some trending story regarding politics, policies, personalities, or pop culture to empower you with the information you need to defy an unjust legal system. If that interests you, please like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell so you get notified every time we upload one of our powerful and informative videos. So there is a lot more to say about Project 2025. And not just Project 2025, but there are other parties involved in a wider conspiracy, a wider, what I would describe as racist conspiracy. And I'm going to connect the dots in this video. I'm going to connect the dots. All right. So you stay with me as we do just that. Now, please go over and get a copy of my book, Education and Justice, so that you will know how to advocate if you have an African-American boy in the public school system. Also, go to our website, lljp.org, and register your young man to take part in the BARS reading program. BARS is an acronym that stands for Black America Reading Strongly. We created this program to help young African-American boys develop better reading skills over the summer. All right. We started it in June of this year. It will end September 1 this year. Go over and enroll your son. It will benefit him. Hey, everyone. I am Attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. Recently, I took a look at our analytics and I noticed something shocking. Many of you watch our videos and I believe you enjoy them, but you haven't subscribed yet. What are you waiting for? Again, I was shocked because I know our content is empowering and informative. Plus, our 2024 goal is to have 150,000 subscribers before the end of the year. Please help us by hitting that subscribe button, especially you young folks. We particularly want to increase our number of young subscribers. Thanks for all your continued support. We appreciate it very much. All right, so let's get into this. Project 2025 and SCOTUS and their racist conspiracy. All right, let's go to another screen. So let's look at this because I want to connect the dots here. I want to connect the dots. So let's look at the three branches of our government that are established by the United States Constitution. Article 1, the legislative branch. Article 2, the executive branch. Article 3, the judicial branch. All right, so these three logos represent all three branches of our government. And notice underneath the White House, you see federal agencies. You see the Department of Education, the Department of Justice. You see the Federal Reserve Bank and other federal agencies there. Now, what is sort of the sticking point here, or where the tension comes from, is the fact that you have the GOP and the Democratic Party that are trying to control these branches of government, because those two political parties have different ideological worldviews, right? So they want to control these branches of government. At the moment, the GOP controls SCOTUS, the U.S. Supreme Court. They have 6 conservative members on that court. And this is an activist court. This court has made itself very clear that it's going to tell the country what the law is. So almost anything the other two branches do, the U.S. Supreme Court stands in the position ready to say, no, that is not what the law is. And they have the power and the authority to strike down anything. And in some cases, even legislate from the bench, which is what I believe they did with this most recent immunity case, having given presidents absolute immunity over criminal prosecution for their official acts. As I've explained to you, the problem is what are official acts and what are unofficial acts. And once again, the court, those 6 conservatives will tell us what's official and what's not official. But at any event, they are vying, both political parties, which I'm neither one. I'm not Democrat or Republican. I'm an independent voter. All right. So both are vying for control of these branches of government. Right now, the Democratic Party has control over the White House, and the GOP has control over the House, whereas the Democratic Party also controls the Senate. All right. Now, those agencies underneath the White House come under the control of the president. But the GOP, Project 2025, MAGA, feels like these agencies have a whole lot more power than they should have. They call it, the GOP calls that, the administrative state. And what they believe is there are federal employees, a federal bureaucracy that is left-leaning, that is progressive in nature, that is woke, to use their term, their co-opted term, by the way, right? A term that we know does not mean what they have assigned a meaning to it. It doesn't mean that. But they've co-opted it, and they've made the word woke nefarious. So they use that nefarious meaning on the word woke to say that the federal agencies have a bunch of employees that are woke, that are liberal, that are progressive. And they don't like that. And I'm going to show you why they don't like that. And I'm going to show you what they intend to do about that. All right, now let's go back, because they've already won a huge victory to curtail the power of this alleged liberal administrative state with a recent U.S. Supreme Court case. Now, Project 2025 is very well funded, very well supported by a number of right-leaning, right-wing, white conservative, white evangelical, even racist organizations. Organizations like ALEC, the Federalist Society, the Conservative PAC, Turning Point, of course, that's Charlie Kirk, the Heritage Foundation, Dr. Kevin Roberts, the Manhattan Institute, the Faith and Freedom Coalition, of course, the GOP, Liberty University, the Southern Baptist Convention. All of these organizations are on the same page about wanting to take control of the government and then steer that government in a very, very conservative right-wing direction that essentially will protect white male hegemony. And make no question about this. Don't doubt this point. That's what this is all about. This is white fear over the fact that America could be controlled by non-white people. That's why the election of Barack Obama was so very disturbing to white conservatives. It confirmed their worst nightmare. And so they began to take steps to prevent that from ever happening again. Steps like gutting the Voting Rights Act, namely. And that was a big step toward trying to control that genie that had escaped the bottle. But guess what happened? Now we have a black female vice president. So what kind of fear do you think that brings out of the Heritage Foundation, out of the Project 2025, SCOTUS, etc.? All right, so they are determined to prevent America from ever being controlled, as Ann Coulter says, by anyone other than a WASP, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. That's what she said, right? And she doesn't speak for all white people, but she speaks for a lot of them, So this is definitely about protecting and preserving white male supremacy. So these organizations are absolutely supportive of Project 2025. But not just those organizations, but these corporations as well are huge donors, contributors to the GOP. And these are on a list. These corporations and many more are on a list of corporate backers and supporters who supported folks who denied our recent election. Companies that we all do business with. I think we need to rethink whether we need to continue doing business with them. But companies like Home Depot, FedEx, Walmart, Delta, AT&T, UPS. So the opposition is well funded and well organized. A recent U.S. Supreme Court case came down and it furthers Project 2025's goal of eliminating this alleged woke administrative state. But before I tell you what that case is, let me give you some background. In the 80s, the U.S. Supreme Court handed down the Chevron USA Inc. versus NDRC Inc. case, handed down a ruling in that case. And let me read the ruling for you. I won't get too much into the facts of the case. But the ruling basically says if a statute is silent or ambiguous with respect to a specific issue, and the federal agency's action is based on a permissible construction of the statute, give deference to the agency's construction of the statute. Okay, let me explain this. So this case had to do with the EPA. EPA handed down some regulation that was based upon its duty to provide protection for the environment. The EPA was created because of Congress. Congress enacted a law that essentially resulted in the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, when Congress enacts a law and then essentially creates a federal agency to implement and enforce that law, of course, issues will arise. And when those issues arise, then you got to look back at the statute that Congress wrote. If that statute is clear on the particular issue that has arisen, then whatever Congress says controls. But if that statute is not clear on the particular issue at hand, then you look to see what the federal agency said, what action they took. And if it is reasonable, if it's permissible, if it's a reasonable construction of the statute, then this Chevron case said you defer to that federal agency. And over time, that gave federal agencies a lot of authority. Conservatives have never liked it. Now, let me give you some background on why they don't like it. Because a lot of these conservative states really push states' rights, even as far back as slavery. When the federal government, the Union Army, came into the South to fight to end and abolish slavery, that was very offensive to Southern states. Their attitude was, these are our N-words, these are our slaves, these are our states. You don't tell us what to do with our N-words or what to do with our slaves. You Yankees, right? So they have always taken offense to the intervention of federal action, federal agents, no matter what it is. And we African Americans have oftentimes had to look to the federal government, right? Because we oftentimes could not get justice in states, state courts and state legislatures and so forth. They were too prejudiced, too racist, too white supremacists, oftentimes members of the KKK and all of that. So we had to look to the federal government that oversaw and enforced federal law, right? Like the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. We have had to look to the federal government for fair enforcement of those laws. And again, white Southern conservatives have always been offended by that. They resent that. So the more federal agencies are able to enforce the law, the more conservatives resent that. And that was the reason why the conservatives basically hated the Chevron case. And they got a big victory in a recent U.S. Supreme Court case that overturned Chevron. So white conservatives and some libertarians hated the Chevron case, again, for two reasons. It allowed federal agencies to interfere with the interests of their corporate supporters. And it allowed an alleged woke administrative state to interfere with their right-wing anti-black agenda. So white conservatives and libertarians, again, hated the Chevron case that has been gutted. I'll show you in just a moment. Because once again, the conservative movement is supported by all of those corporations and more that I just showed you, right? And those corporations hate regulations. They hate regulations. So they hate these federal agencies almost as much as, if not more than, the conservatives. And so those corporations heavily support white conservatives. Heavily. All right. You may even remember a case that was handed down, Citizens United, a few years ago when Obama was president, that gave corporations the ability to make huge contributions to political action committees. All right. So that gives them the power to basically write legislation and use money, hang money, dangle money in the face of politicians to basically get them to write those laws, enact those laws. Okay? So corporations hate federal regulations as much as conservatives. So that is one reason why organizations like ALEC, right? ALEC is a huge one. Go look it up. Support these white conservatives for race and class reasons. But also because, again, this alleged woke administrative state and these federal agencies interfere with this right-wing anti-black agenda that deeply troubles me. All right, let's keep moving. So here's the case that gutted the Chevron case. Remember, the Chevron case said two things. It said if Congress was not clear in a statute that a federal agency is responsible for implementing, and the federal agency takes an action or promulgates a regulation, if it is reasonable what they have promulgated or the action they took, then the courts would have to defer to the federal agency. Okay? They've hated it. And there are folks actually on the U.S. Supreme Court. You take, for example, Neil Gorsuch. His mother, Ann Gorsuch, was the administrator of the EPA back in the early 80s. And he has just had a beef against federal regulations since then because his mother was very conservative and she wanted to roll back a bunch of EPA regulations. Okay. And so he just sort of grew up in a family that was very conservative and extremely anti-regulation. So some of these people on the court have been their whole careers working to end regulations promulgated by these federal agencies, like Neil Gorsuch. Others have been working their entire legal careers to gut the Voting Rights Act or the Civil Rights Act. Those are the kinds of people, those 6 conservatives who are on the court, including Clarence Thomas. All right, so this case, this most recent case that the U.S. Supreme Court handed down just a week or two ago, the Loper Bright Enterprises case. It held the Administrative Procedure Act, APA, requires courts to exercise their independent judgment in deciding whether an agency has acted within its statutory authority, and courts may not defer to an agency interpretation of the law simply because a statute is ambiguous. Chevron is overruled. So this Loper Bright Enterprises case got rid of the Chevron case. So now judges cannot defer to federal agencies simply because a statute may be ambiguous. The judges must now make decisions about whether a federal agency, regulation, or action is constitutional. So as I read that opinion, to me, it felt like not only is it dangerous for vulnerable communities, but it is a huge power grab by the courts, by SCOTUS. Huge. So they have put it in the hands of federal judges to decide if a federal agency has promulgated a constitutional regulation. So think about it. Just think about it. What would be step 2 with this? If they said federal judges must determine if a federal agency violates the Constitution with its regulation or action, then what would be the next reasonable step? It is to continue to pack the courts with right-wing judges. You follow me? And it is the reason why they will stick with Trump no matter what. Now, why is it racist, by the way? Because take, for example, the EPA. Just take, for example, the EPA. One of the biggest issues that Black Americans deal with, it's not talked about a lot, but it's a big issue. Environmental racism. Because states, corporations love to put toxic waste, toxic dumps in Black communities. Love to put corporations that emit a lot of toxins in the air in the Black community. Toxins in the water, in the food, in the Black community. Just go to the average Black community, find out where the dump is, find out where the corporation is that is contaminating the water system, and it's in the Black community. They never put those in white communities. Never, ever. Affluent white, never. Always in the Black community. And it is the reason why Black people tend to deal with a disproportionate percentage of many medical conditions because of environmental racism. These corporations could care less. All they care about is making money. And all their politicians that they have paid off care about is keeping their corporate supporters happy. So who gets the short end of the stick? Black America and other vulnerable populations. So that's why it's racist. And it is a conspiracy because these people, the people on the court, the people at Heritage, the people in those organizations that I showed you, they obviously flow in the same system. They are part of the Federalist Society. They are part of CPAC. They are part of those conservative groups. They talk amongst themselves. That's not surprising because they're friends, they're comrades. So they develop, they say to one another, I'm sure in private meetings and over dinner and on the golf course, we need to get rid of Chevron. We need to get rid of that Chevron case. We need to get rid of this deep state. We need to get rid of this administrative state. And Trump is just the man to help us get it done because, he'll do whatever. And he's not very, thoughtful about these things. All we got to do is just tell him what to do. Give him a list. Like the Federalist Society gave him a list of judges. And Project 2025 boasts that 2/3 of their policy suggestions, Trump implemented them during his last administration. So these folks out here who say, well, Trump doesn't agree with Project 2025. It doesn't matter what Trump agrees with. He's going to do it. He has no other choice. They're putting him in office. They're paying for his campaign. They're going to be running his administration. Project 2025 has told us that it has summoned white conservatives, black conservatives too, to come to the White House, come to D.C., and we're going to replace those leftists, those liberals, those progressives with you folks so that you can get rid of all the DEI, all of the any racial preference, any sort of equity, anything to help black people. We're going to put you in a place to get rid of all of that. That is a racist conspiracy. So the U.S. Supreme Court gave Project 2025 white conservatives a huge victory. Of course, there was a huge victory with the immunity case. Also a huge victory for some of the January 6 folks. Most people, however, have not heard about and understand how important it was that Chevron was overruled by SCOTUS, which again basically means that federal agencies will not get the respect of being able to promulgate a regulation and just having carte blanche power to enforce it. Courts will have to decide that. And if Project 2025 and Trump and MAGA have their way, the judge that goes in front of will be a right-wing judge, so that federal agencies are not able to make these decisions. They're made by corporations. And I really want you to understand this piece about corporations, because in some ways, this is not just about how Project 2025 can affect black people, but everybody. And I'm going to keep showing you via videos what Project 2025 has in store for our country. And I'm just scratching the surface. There's a 932-page manual that they released. And by the way, if you think that this is not a war that continues, watch this video. Watch this video.
In spite of all this nonsense from the left, we are going to win. We're in the process of taking this country back. And let me speak about the radical left. You and I have both been parts of faculties and faculty senates and understand that the left has taken over our institutions. The reason that they are apoplectic right now, the reason that so many anchors on MSNBC, for example, are losing their minds daily is because our side is winning. And so I come full circle in this response and just want to encourage you with some substance that we are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
That's war. In case you thought I was being hyperbolic here, that's war. That's what it is. And he says that is Dr. Kevin Roberts of the Heritage Foundation, president of the Heritage Foundation. He said that they're winning and that we're in the middle of the Second American Revolution and it will remain bloodless if the left allows it. In other words, try to stop it, and there will be war, bloodshed, death, shooting, guns. That's what he said. That's the only way to read that. It will remain bloodless unless the left tries to stop it, tries to prevent it. We're ready. Our powder is dry. Dr. Roberts, you ought to be shaming yourself. You ought to be shaming yourself for trying to incite violence like that. Because let me just say, from what I'm seeing, from what I'm understanding, it won't be like it was in the past, where folks just show up in black communities and just commit massacres. It won't be that way with the folks out there now. And, you know, back then, blacks couldn't even legally own firearms. But a whole lot of black folks have absolutely picked up firearms, have many of them, and many are being trained and so on. Which is why I say it's shameful that you said that, because we don't need a war, another revolution or civil war in this country. We don't need that. So please go somewhere and get yourself together and calm down. Calm down, because again, no one is afraid. No one's afraid of what you're saying. So get a grip. That's what I want to say to you. Get a grip. If you are a man of faith, which I'm sure you probably say you are, go pray. Go open your Bible. Get on your knees. Because that is definitely not Christian talk. All right, so that's my response to him. So if you doubt that we're in war, you got another thing coming. All right, now let's go back to my screen. So again, to show you that SCOTUS and Project 2025 works in tandem on this, this manual says our goal is to assemble an army of aligned, vetted, trained, and prepared conservatives to go to work on day one to deconstruct the administrative state. Okay? He goes on to say the DEI revolution in labor affected not only the administrative state, but it has also targeted much of the private sector, owing to the combination of regulatory pressure and eager human resources offices in the private sector. Much of American labor and employment policy has become institutionally oriented toward woke goals. And then he says, dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. All right? Those are the goals of Project 2025, and you see that they are aligned and consistent with the goals of the 6 conservatives on the United States Supreme Court. And they are consistent with the GOP in Congress, in state legislatures, and across the country. This is a conspiracy. There's no other way to see it. And this conspiracy will have the worst impact on vulnerable minority communities, most especially African Americans. So Project 2025 is not something to become hysterical about, but as the scripture says, it is something that we should be aware of, we should know it, we should understand it, and then prepare for it. Prepare for it. And not be like the simpleton who says, oh, this is just fear-mongering, and then it's too late before they realize, no, this is not fear-mongering. Dr. Roberts just told us. He just said they're taking this country back. They're making America great again. Great in their eyes. And again, can only refer back to Jim Crow or slavery, even worse. So this is not fear-mongering. Dr. Roberts and his group have released a 900-page book, their own social media, their own meme media, saying we're taking back our country, and if you try to stop us, there will be bloodshed. So I'm not pushing fear. This is the reality. And you need to get prepared for it by understanding what Project 2025 is. Okay? All right. I am attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers, and each and every week we bring you this very type of legal analysis to help you defy an unjust legal system and to nullify systemic racism. Until the next time, peace. I put out my first video about Project 2025 over 7 months ago, and now people are just beginning to catch on how dangerous Project 2025 really is. Well, today I'm going to go deeper and show you how Project 2025 will unleash much more virulent, anti-Black racial discrimination. Stay with me. Hello, everybody. I am Attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers, and each and every week we bring you at least one legal analysis of some trending story regarding politics, policies, personalities, or pop culture to empower you with the information you need to define an unjust legal system. If that interests you, and I certainly hope it does, it really should in a day like today. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell so that you'll get notified when we upload one of our powerful and informative videos. So we're going to talk about how Project 2025 will unleash much more virulent, anti-Black racism. That's what I want to talk with you about today. Please go get a copy of my book, Education and Justice: How Public Schools Fail African American Male Students. I assure you, if your kid, your son especially, is in public schools, they are failing him in multiple ways that you probably don't even realize until it's too late. In this book, I tell you how they're doing this and what you can do about it. Also, we started, as you know, a program called BARS, Black America Reading Strongly. The program started June 1st, and already people have enrolled and registered their sons in this program, and it is doing well. Those young men are reading books and their parents are excited, and we're excited at what is happening. Please, if you have a child, a son especially, that is not reading at grade level, go and register. Go to our website at lljp.org, okay? We want to see a whole lot more young boys in this program because we want to get the reading scores of African American male students way up. The numbers show that African American male students typically read below their grade level. We want to correct that, all right? So go and enroll your child. All right, so with that said, Project 2025 is starting to get some traction. Hey everyone, I am Attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. Recently, I took a look at our analytics and I noticed something shocking. Many of you watch our videos and I believe you enjoy them, but you haven't subscribed yet. What are you waiting for? Again, I was shocked because I know our content is empowering and informative. Plus, our 2024 goal is to have 150,000 subscribers before the end of the year. Please help us by hitting that subscribe button, especially you young folks. We particularly want to increase our number of young subscribers. Thanks for all your continued support. We appreciate it very much. Again, I did my first video on Project 2025, again, 7 months ago. 7 months ago. And now I understand, even last night, I didn't watch the BET Awards, but I was told that Taraji P. Henson actually told folks, because she was the host, I think, that they need to get up to speed on Project 2025. Now, the problem with getting up to speed on Project 2025 is they have released a 932-page manual. That's almost 2 reams of paper. That's that thick, okay? Most people don't have the time to read something like that, and some of what you read is very legal, it's very technical, and most people probably couldn't understand some of it anyway. So I've taken it upon myself to go into the deeper parts of Project 2025 and share with you what I believe are the most problematic provisions for African American people in Project 2025. So what I want to do today is I want to share with you a little bit about something called disparate impact. Disparate impact. All right, so we're going to go and see exactly what disparate impact is and why it will definitely enable and unleash much more racial discrimination against Black Americans. So I say right here, the conservative movement has initiated Project 2025, a highly structured and well-financed campaign with an agenda that opposes democracy and civil rights. 7 months ago, I created my initial Project 2025 video when most people seemed oblivious to its threat. In the upcoming Project 2025 videos, I will explore in more detail and highlight particular dangers faced by African Americans from Project 2025. And the thing to remember about Project 2025 is that its policies have been around at least since the Reagan administration, because the policies were developed by this organization called the Heritage Foundation, again, which came into fruition in the early years of the Reagan administration. All right. And today that organization is led by this man, Kevin Roberts, Dr. Kevin Roberts. He's president of the Heritage Foundation. And what the Heritage Foundation did back during the Reagan administration was developed Reaganomics, if you will, developed sort of a Reaganism sort of approach to government, and then dispersed those policies from Reagan's policies around to conservatives around the country. So what these folks intend to do is to institutionalize Trumpism. They want to make Trumpism the standard bearer for the conservative movement. And we see that taking place in the Congress, in the courts, in the Supreme Court. Just today, we got this immunity case down from the Supreme Court. I will be doing a video. In fact, I think I'm going to go live and talk about that. And by the time you get this video, I may have already done so. So just if you missed it, go and watch the replay of the live if I do it live. I think I'm going to do it live. So they want to institutionalize Trumpism, and they're using the Supreme Court now that they have 6 conservative members on the court. They're using Congress to the degree that they can, state legislatures, churches, and so on, to codify, if you will, to memorialize, to make Trumpism the standard for conservatives, whether he win or lose. So what they're trying to do is really dangerous, very dangerous. And I got many videos planned to explain to you exactly how they are trying to do this. And as I said in the opening, they are well-financed and well-organized and have been around a long time. So they know how to get their agenda done. And those who oppose Project 2025, we're not that organized, unfortunately. We're not that well-funded. And so typically they're able to get their agenda done because our opposition is not as effective as what they're doing. Well, I'm going to do my part. I'm going to do my part. In fact, we're going to be introducing some merchandise soon, so that you can start purchasing this merchandise and wearing it and promoting our fight to defend civil rights and to fight Project 2025. All right, so Kevin Roberts is the leader of the Heritage Foundation, which gave birth to Project 2025. And what you see on the screen now is the manual, that 932-page manual that they've written that covers a whole host of things. I have been scouring that document, and there's one thing that I want to share with you today about what they intend to do, which will definitely unleash a lot more anti-Black racism. All right, let me explain what I'm saying. So disparate impact. Disparate impact is probably a word you've never heard in your life, or a term that you've never heard in your life. In that manual that I just told you about, let me quote these words. Courts have ruled that even without evidence of overt, intentional discrimination, such results might suggest discrimination. This doctrine of disparate impact could be ended legislatively or at least narrowed through the regulatory process by a future administration. So, Dr. Roberts here is saying that they want to see the disparate impact doctrine done away with, like they did DEI, like they did affirmative action. Because disparate impact, we litigators, practitioners, civil rights litigators, we use disparate impact to prove our civil rights cases all the time. Because quite often when we bring these lawsuits, these civil rights lawsuits, we don't have intentional discrimination or overt discrimination. We as Black Americans know we don't have to be called the N-word to be discriminated against. We know that, having been the victims of discrimination all our lives. We know that racists nowadays are much more smarter and wiser than to use a racial slur. Nonetheless, they discriminate against African Americans all the time. And you see, what the law requires is that you show that the discrimination was intentional. And again, short of somebody calling you the N-word, it is very, very difficult to prove that the discrimination was, in fact, intentional. So the law allows us to show disparate impact. Disparate impact means that we can show that Blacks disproportionately have been affected by this type of discrimination. And that then shows the intent of the discrimination. So it's a way to sort of get around the fact that intentional discrimination is very, very hard to prove. If we can show that enough Blacks have suffered some injury or some damages because of a particular type of discrimination, then that meets the disparate impact doctrine. Well, they want to get rid of that so that a civil rights lawsuit will be dismissed by a judge unless you're able to show just some overt, intentional racism. And again, that's hard to do nowadays. Now, let me give you an example so that you can see exactly how this plays out in court. Meet Rhonda. She is a real estate investor who buys and flips houses. Recently, she sold a home she bought before the pandemic and made a nice profit. The money from the sale was deposited into her Bank of America account. A few days later, Rhonda went to the bank to withdraw $27,000 to invest in another deal. Despite being a loyal customer for 15 years, the manager refused her request for no legitimate reason. Rhonda tried another branch the next day. This time, the teller asked her for her driver's license to verify her identity. After showing her ID, the teller still refused and called the supervisor. The supervisor confirmed Rhonda was the account holder, but started asking offensive questions like, "Where did you get this money?" Rhonda refused to answer the question, and the branch manager was called. The manager also asked offensive questions. Frustrated and knowing she was being racially profiled, Rhonda asked why. They responded by calling the police, who verified her identity, but the bank still didn't honor her request. Now let's stop there. Rhonda, a legitimate real estate investor, sold a house, made a nice penny on it. The money was deposited in her bank account, and so then she wanted to use some of that money to buy and flip another house. So she went to her bank that she had been banking with for 15 years and said, "Hey, I'd like to withdraw $27,000. She went through all the protocols. She showed them her ID, put in a PIN number, all that you have to do. And lo and behold, they refused to give her the money. So she left that bank. That was one day. She left that bank. Next day went to another bank, figuring, okay, maybe, the teller had a bad day or something. Same thing happened at the second bank. Very same thing happened again. But this time, they called the police and asked her a bunch of offensive questions. Where did you get this money? Something that never happens to whites. not those kind of offensive questions. Okay? So that is what happened in my scenario here. Let's go back and see what happened. It took Rhonda 2 months to get her money through a wire transfer. She just got discouraged, didn't want to go back, so instead of showing her face, she decided to do it through a wire transfer. In other words, this is banking while black. That's what she dealt with. She hired a law firm and sued the bank under a civil rights law from 1866, now known as 42 U.S.C. Section 1981. We bring these lawsuits all the time under Section 1981. Now watch this, as I just said. No one called Rhonda the N-word. No one said to Rhonda, we don't give this much money to black people. That didn't happen. That has happened with other litigants, other plaintiffs, but that did not happen in this case. But in order for her lawsuit to progress and in order for her to win it, the law requires that she shows intentional discrimination. That is really, 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 really hard. Really hard. Because like in the example that I just gave you, she couldn't show that anyone again called her the N-word or mentioned her race, but she knew that's what it was about. And we as African Americans know that that's what that was about, because no one would do that to a white person. Probably would never do that to an Asian person, maybe a Latino person, but not to a white person. Probably not to an Asian person. So she knows this discrimination, racial discrimination, banking while black, racial profiling. Absolutely. But the law lifts that standard so high, she has to show intentional discrimination. But there is an exception, and that exception is if Rhonda can show disparate impact, which means, can Rhonda show that other similarly situated black Americans have experienced the same type of banking while black? And guess what? Just a simple Google search will show you many blacks have dealt with the same type of discrimination, including famed director Ryan Coogler, right, who directed the film Black Panther. So it happens quite a bit. So one may be able to show disparate impact without showing that someone used the N-word when they denied this black person their withdrawal or discriminated against them in some other way. All right, now, notice these types of lawsuits come under 42 U.S.C. Section 1981, which is a civil rights law that was actually enacted back in the 1860s for the benefit of African Americans. And essentially it says that corporations must enter into contracts and enforce those contracts as it does with white people in the same way. So when you go, for example, to buy a car, to lease an apartment, to buy a house, to do business at your bank, to do business at Walmart, or some other place where a contract is established, they got to treat you the same way that they treat whites. Otherwise, you can bring a Section 1981 lawsuit against them. Now, the issue is, as soon as you file the lawsuit, the other law firm is going to file a motion to dismiss and say that you did not present any facts to show intentional discrimination. And our response is, well, we don't have to, because we will show disparate impact. We will show that other blacks have been treated just this way. And that then will get us around the intentional discrimination requirement or standard. Well, Project 2025 intends to get rid of disparate impact. Doing so would make it easier for corporations to racially profile black people in various areas like employment and housing and many, many, many other ways. In other words, the impact of getting rid of disparate impact would be devastating for Black Americans. Because corporations will say, we don't care that you file a lawsuit because you can't prove intentional discrimination. And because of Project 2025, Congress has gotten rid of the disparate impact doctrine. So what is that going to do? It's going to do just what the title says. It's going to unleash more racism in this country. That is just one of the specific threats that Project 2025 poses for Black Americans. So, right here, Dr. Roberts, Kevin Roberts, in that mandate for leadership, it says, quote, courts have ruled that even without evidence of overt intentional discrimination, notice it doesn't say courts have ruled that even without evidence of discrimination, but overt intentional discrimination. That's the hurdle. That is the hurdle, and it's a very high hurdle. Such results might suggest discrimination. This doctrine of disparate impact could be ended legislatively. That means Congress can kill it, like they've done the Voting Rights Act, or at least narrowed through the regulatory process by a future administration. So if Trump gets in office, this will be on the list of things that Project 2025, Dr. Roberts, and the Heritage Foundation wants the Trump administration to accomplish. And it's just one of many. One of many. I got more videos coming this week actually, showing you how Project 2025 specifically targets African Americans in many ways. And when you understand what Project 2025 is intending to do and see how that agenda is being implemented through SCOTUS, through they want the White House, through Congress, through state legislatures, wow. It is very serious. So let me close by saying this. As I said in my live presentation just after, I think a day after the debate, for me, it doesn't matter if Joe Biden had been wheeled in a wheelchair into the debate and he fell out the wheelchair, fell on his face and couldn't get up. It wouldn't matter with me because I still would vote for Joe Biden. Not only because of the policies that Biden and Harris have put forth that have benefited Black Americans, but because of what Project 2025 and these folks want to do to African American people, people just like this. Trump, Dr. Kevin Roberts, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Speaker Mike Johnson, and millions of others. Millions of others. One of the things that Project 2025 want to do, and I'm going to talk about this in another video, is they want to fire thousands of people who work for the government and replace them with extreme right-wing conservatives, just in civil service type jobs, just government type jobs. This is what they're planning to do. We got to stop it. We got to ensure that Biden wins this election because Project 2025 is awful. I am Attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. Thank you for tuning in. And as always, please like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell so that you'll get notified every time we upload one of these powerful and informative videos. Until the next time, peace. I'm going to share with you the absolute most alarming objective that Project 2025 has for America. Everything you've heard and seen about Project 2025 thus far, don't compare to what I'm going to show you about what they have planned for this country. Stay with me. Hello, everybody. I am attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. Each and every week, we bring you at least one legal analysis of some trending story regarding politics, policies, personalities, and pop culture to empower you with the information you need to defy an unjust legal system and to nullify systemic racism. If that interests you, please go ahead and like, share, subscribe, comment, and click the bell so you'll get notified every time we upload one of these powerful and informative videos. All right, so like I told you in the opener, what I'm going to share with you today is the most alarming objective of Project 2025. I promise you that. All right, before we get into it, I encourage you to go to Amazon and grab a copy of my book if you have a young boy in a public school. This book will help you identify and respond to the many ways that public schools mistreat African American male students. Also, we created a program called BARS. BARS stand for Black America Reading Strongly. And the purpose of BARS is to help young Black male students increase their reading level because the numbers show, the statistics show us that young Black boys are not reading at grade level, the majority of them. So we created this summer reading program to help young boys get their reading scores up where they should be. If you're interested, just simply go to our website at lljp.org. That is the Lazarus Law and Justice Project.org, or simply lljp.org. Hey everyone, I am attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. Recently, I took a look at our analytics and I noticed something shocking. Many of you watch our videos and I believe you enjoy them, but you haven't subscribed yet. What are you waiting for? Again, I was shocked because I know our content is empowering and informative. Plus, our 2024 goal is to have 150,000 subscribers before the end of the year. Please help us by hitting that subscribe button, especially you young folks. We particularly want to increase our number of young subscribers. Thanks for all your continued support. We appreciate it very much. Now, let me also say thank you so much. We have reached 100,000 subscribers. And that is all because of you. Every time you liked, every time you shared, every time you commented, you subscribers, you all made it happen. And we are greatly, greatly appreciative. Now we're going to do a special broadcast where we do a giveaway and really show you how much we appreciate your support for the Defiant Lawyers YouTube channel. We are deeply appreciative because it enables us to get out this message to even more people. Thanks again. All right, so the most alarming objective, let's go to another screen. The most alarming objective of Project 2025 for America. And here it is. The most alarming and dangerous objective of Project 2025 is remaking or reshaping America into a fascist autocracy with Trump as the autocrat or the dictator. That is the most alarming. All the many other things that Project 2025 talks about in that mandate for leadership over a 900-page book, those things, yes, are very concerning. I've done a couple of videos on those things. But all of that pales in comparison to the fact that these folks want to reshape, totally remake our country into a fascist country and then give all this power to Donald Trump to do as he pleases. That is an alarming objective. And I wanted to share with you up front what that's all about. Now, this is going to be a longer video. All right. I got to go through a lot. You know, I'm an attorney, so I'm going to prove my case. That was my opening statement. My opening statement again is the most alarming objective of Project 2025 is the fact that these folks want to remake and reshape our country into a fascist country and then give Trump the reins of this country. That's my opening statement. I'm going to prove it. All right. But again, this video is longer and some of you have short attention spans. So I just gave you what the video is about. For those of you who want to learn why I say this and what we can do about it, you stay with me throughout the rest of this video. Okay. All right. Let's move it. This is what we do not want, but this is what they're planning. A nation that Trump is over as an autocrat, as even perhaps a dictator, and the reins of government are in his power, especially federal agencies. It is alarming for any person, but especially for a man like Donald Trump, whose moral character is much lacking. And I'm going to show you the one more thing they need to happen in order for Trump to become an autocrat, perhaps even a dictator for this country. There's just one thing that Project 2025 lacks. Now, I did a video on this about 3 months ago, and I laid out what those conditions are. And I'm going to show you in this video what needs to happen in order for Trump to become an autocrat or a dictator of this country. It was at one point unfathomable. I mean, you just couldn't imagine it happening. But we're flatly looking at it right now. It's facing us. It's looking us in the face. It is right in front of us. Again, go back and listen to the video that I did where I said that Trump is closer to being a dictator than ever. I did it about 3 months ago. I laid out what conditions needed to be met, and all of those conditions have been met except for one. Now, before we look at what those conditions are, let us look here, and let me give you a simple definition of what is a fascist autocracy. Project 2025, SCOTUS, MAGA, and the GOP want to establish a white male-dominated fascist autocracy with Trump as the autocrat. Fascism is a nationalist movement, and an autocracy is a government in which one person, the autocrat, possesses unlimited power. Examples include Russia, China, Iran, and etc. It is no surprise that Trump greatly admires Xi of China and Putin of Russia. Trump admires those people because he wants to be one of them. And this country is close to making him one of those. I couldn't fathom this just 6 months ago or a year ago. I knew it could happen, but to be sure, even Republicans, the GOP would not want that. But we're there. We're very close to it. Okay? Now, what are those conditions? There are 3 of those. Those conditions are, as I predicted 3 months ago in a previous video, first, this immunity case was with the DC Circuit, and they ruled against him. I said in that video, if the DC Circuit ruled against Trump on this immunity case, right, the Jack Smith case, then that would be one of the conditions that had been met. And then I said, SCOTUS then had to accept Trump's appeal, which they should have never accepted it, because the DC Circuit got it right. So whether they would accept the appeal was questionable, but because there are 6 conservatives on the court who love Trump and what he does, they accepted it, as I expected they would, and they did the unthinkable. They gave the man absolute immunity. That was the second condition. First condition, the DC Circuit ruled against him. The second condition was that SCOTUS would accept his appeal and grant him absolute immunity. SCOTUS went further, however, SCOTUS not only gave him absolute immunity, but SCOTUS also weakened federal agencies when they overruled the Chevron case that I've already explained to you. They essentially got rid of what's called the Chevron deference, and in so doing, weakening federal agencies and giving that power to Trump. So we check off those three things. The only thing that is remaining, the only thing that keeps us from an autocracy, from fascism, is Trump getting reelected. Now, let me look you square in your eyes and say that we cannot allow that to happen. We must vote. We must take others to the polls. We cannot let that happen. You've heard me say, and I'll continue to say, I say it even more forcefully, actually. I don't care if Joe Biden was rolled into the convention that the Democrats are going to have on a stretcher with tubes hanging out of him. I would vote for him, and I would encourage you to vote for him, because him in that condition is better than this country embracing fascism and making Trump or anybody an autocrat or a dictator of our nation. Now, I'm not fear-mongering. We see and hear these people planning to do this. They're not shy about this. They don't hide this. This is not something that is written and kept in some secret vault. They have been publicizing this. Trump has said this repeatedly on the campaign trail. I'm going to show you. So Project 2025 is no secret to anyone. And thankfully, people are now beginning to read Project 2025. I did a video on Project 2025 7 months ago, over 7 months ago. But I'm grateful that folks are beginning to get up to speed on Project 2025. So this is no secret. This is not fear-mongering. I'm merely reporting or sharing with you what they have already said. All right? Now, and just to show you Trump's mentality, we all remember Liz Cheney, a former Republican congresswoman from Wyoming, I think. She was one of two Republicans who sat on the January 6th commission and found that Trump broke laws and inspired an insurrection. For that, she has become an arch enemy to Trump. And that's just the type of thing an autocrat, a dictator would do. So to go at their critics. And that's what he has actually said. You see the pictures of her here, and one of them has a bull's eye on it. And yes, Trump has a bull's eye on Liz Cheney. And then he put on his social media platform, look at how crazy this is. Elizabeth Lynn Cheney is guilty of treason. Liz Cheney did nothing to our country. What is he talking about? Yet he sees himself as our country. I mean, that's an autocratic mindset. That's a dictatorship mindset, to see himself as the country. If you do something to him, in his mind, you're doing it to the country. I mean, that is really sick, folks. And then he wrote down there, if you want a televised military tribunal, he wants to have her tried on TV, live TV, in a military tribunal. And guess what? If he gets reelected, he can do it. He'll be able to do it. He could do any number of things to Liz Cheney with this absolute immunity case now. Having given presidents absolute immunity, SCOTUS has essentially unleashed him to do whatever he want to do with his political opponents or people that he has gripes with. And Liz Cheney apparently is on the top of his list. This is not America. This is more important than the price of a loaf of bread. This is more important than the price of eggs and milk. This is the most important thing facing our country right now. It is not inflation. That is not the most important thing that we're facing right now. It is stopping this man from becoming the president again, with all of his baggage and his anger and his meanness and his unlimited power that was given to him by SCOTUS, who was a part of this conspiracy. They want to apparently see our country become fascist under an autocrat or dictator, namely Donald Trump. They must want that. Look at these cases. In a third case, they even found that some of the January 6 folks did not really break the law, or the prosecutors should not have used a particular statute. And, you know, I didn't have a big problem with that case, quite frankly, because as a criminal defense attorney, I sometimes believe prosecutors definitely overreach. And even Justice Jackson, Ketanji Brown Jackson, agreed with the majority on that case. And I did too, even before I read her dissent. I thought, okay, this seems right, because I know prosecutors can overreach. And that case found that that's exactly what they did. All right. So anyway, this is what he has planned for Liz Cheney. This is, again, just sick. There's no other way to look at it. Now, we also know that Trump is out there denying that he knows anything about Project 2025. Although all you have to do is open the manual and you will see that former Trump officials wrote the manual. I found these 12, including Ben Carson, Ken Cuccinelli. He was, I think, over Homeland Security for a while. Christopher Miller, who was over the Department of Defense. Stephen Moore, who's an economist. These people were a part of the Trump administration or advisors to the Trump administration. Yet Trump says he didn't know what was going on with Project 2025, didn't know who's behind it and all that. And here his HUD secretary wrote a chapter in it. And it's a crazy chapter, by the way. It is a crazy chapter. Crazy. I'll probably be doing at least one more video on Project 2025 and show you some more of this craziness in Project 2025. But if you needed more proof, here is Trump shaking the hand of Kevin Roberts, who's president of the Heritage Foundation. So he absolutely knows what this is all about and who's behind it. But to be expected, he lied. He lied. And it's a very easy lie to disprove. But I guess he figures not everyone is going to try to disprove the lie. And so he just tells lies. I don't know that Trump can help himself from doing that. All right, now. So, yes, the absolute immunity case and the Chevron deference case are two cases that really unleashed Donald Trump. I mean, anyone who has absolute immunity from criminal prosecution is above the law and can do whatever he or she wants, including murdering people, killing people, and just saying it was a part of my official duty. And ultimately, the case would end up in front of the 6 people who said he had absolute immunity in the first place. So he's literally above the law. Now give that man power, okay? Put him back in the White House, and you are making one of the most foolish decisions ever made in human history, certainly American history. I believe George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, I believe even those folks would be alarmed at what SCOTUS gave Trump. I do. It is that crazy. And then giving him the ability to fire the folks who run these federal agencies and let him put in his henchmen. It's just crazy. It's crazy. It's what conservatives have salivated over for many, many years. They're finally getting exactly what they want. They got those 6 folks on the court who is rubber stamping everything they do. Because, as I explained in my last video, they're all brothers and compatriots and comrades in the fight for remaking and reshaping our nation. And as I said in my previous video, why, if you want a motive, the motive is they want to protect white supremacy. And so they will establish an autocracy or a dictatorship so long as it protects white supremacy, white male supremacy at that. All right, let's go back to our screen. So here's just some of the wording which shows you how anxious they are to establish fascism and autocracy and make Trump this strong man, basically. Listen to this. In its opening words, Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution makes it abundantly clear that, quote, the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America, close quote. That enormous power is not vested in departments or agencies, in staff or administrative bodies, in non-governmental organizations or other equities and interests close to the government. The president must set and enforce a plan for the executive branch. Sadly, however, a president today assumes office to find a sprawling federal bureaucracy that all too often is carrying out its own policy plans and preferences of, worse yet, the policy plans and preferences of a radical, supposedly, quote, woke, close quote, faction of the country. Now that bureaucracy, and we all have dealt with bureaucracy in our own lives, right? In our own businesses and professions. And we know bureaucracies can become burdensome and, the red tape just makes it horrible at times. But there is the need for some regulation. That's what they're trying to get rid of, as I explained in my last video. They're trying to get rid of any type of regulation. So what? So Trump can have this power and corporations, right? And white supremacists to do what they want. So Congress gave federal agencies the power and authority to carry out the laws that Congress passed, right? So that is the way our country has functioned. But that gets in the way of Trump's autocracy. That gets in the way of Trump's dictatorship. That gets in the way of fascism. So they got rid of it. Let's keep reading. The modern conservative president's task is to limit, control, and direct the executive branch on behalf of the American people. This challenge is created and exacerbated by factors like Congress's decades-long tendency to delegate its lawmaking power to agency bureaucracies. That's not true. Congress still enacts the laws, but the agencies need the ability to promulgate regulations so that they can govern the responsibility that Congress has taxed them with. I mean, that just makes sense, right? Not Trump and his political appointees making these decisions in the interests of Trump or in the interests of corporations. That is crazy. This goes on to say that protects so-called expert authorities from scrutiny, the presumed inability to hold career civil servants accountable for their performance, and the increasing reality that many agencies are not only too big and powerful, but also increasingly weaponized against the public in a president who is elected by the people and empowered by the Constitution to govern. Well, the people need those regulations in place, oftentimes, to protect the people, to prevent Trump and corporations from dumping toxic materials in people's water, or eliminating unions that are there to give working people some power in the workplace, or gutting OSHA, for example, which protects folks from getting injured needlessly in the workplace. I mean, with Trump, with all of this power, he can just basically gut all of these regulations, which are there to protect people. And sometimes they get in the way. Yes, sometimes the bureaucracy is just hard to deal with. But some of it is good. Some of it is needed. And SCOTUS basically got rid of pretty much all of it. Now, let's talk more about this fascism, this autocracy that Trump wants to put in place, along with Project 2025, SCOTUS, and that whole crowd. So I'm going to read some language from a New York Times article that was published back almost a year ago, July 18th, 2023. This has been on the radar screen for a long time. The name of this article, the title, Trump and Allies Forge Plans to Increase Presidential Power in 2025. Do you understand what that means? That is, they want to centralize the power of the federal government in the president's hands, namely in Donald Trump's hands, so that he can pick up the phone. I mean, they can do this already, but people typically don't do that. Presidents typically try to stay out of, the affairs of, for example, the Department of Justice. But Trump now pick up the phone and say, go arrest him, go arrest her, go lock her up, go put this one in jail. Well, we got to give him a day in court? No day in court. Put him in jail. Period. Just put him in jail. Or do this or whatever. I have immunity. There's nothing no one can do to me. Nothing. And he'll have the kind of people around him who will not even question him. You did have some folks in his first administration who said, no, that's not legal, like Bill Barr and James Comey and Mark Asper and others, many others, but not this time. He will get those who are loyal and who are willing to go to prison like many others have done already. This is clear what we're facing. And the one thing that can stop it is to ensure that he doesn't get reelected. Now, I'm not too certain, to be honest with you, that if he doesn't get reelected, I'm not too certain that his supporters will not pull out guns and say, we're taking over. I think we're in that sort of day. But anyway, let's stick with this New York Times article for now. Okay, it says Donald J. Trump and his allies are planning a sweeping expansion of presidential power over the machinery of government if voters return him to the White House in 2025, reshaping the structure of the executive branch to concentrate far greater authority directly in his hands. Their plans, well, let's not gloss over that, to give greater authority directly in his hands. This is not new. They have been planning this for quite a while. Quite a while. And so anyone who says this is fear-mongering is not abreast of what's going on, or they're just trolling. Their plans to centralize more power in the Oval Office stretch far beyond the former president's recent remarks that he would order a criminal investigation into his political rival, President Biden, signaling his intent to end the post-Watergate norm of Justice Department independence from White House political control. Well, again, SCOTUS has now weakened those agencies, given him absolute immunity. This man has a proverbial machine gun in his hand and can use it wherever he wants to use it if he's reelected. That's where you and I come in. Mr. Trump and his associates have a broader goal to alter the balance of power by increasing the president's authority over every part of the federal government that now operates by either law or tradition, with any measure of independence from political interference by the White House, according to a review of his campaign policy proposals and interviews with people close to him. That's why that goal or objective of Project 2025 is the most alarming. And we saw dictatorial and autocratic behavior from Trump in his first administration. He had no respect for our institutions. You remember that? You remember how he cozied up next to Putin and would even dispute oftentimes our intelligence agencies? I mean, it had people wondering, is he a Russian agent? Does Russia have something on him? And here recently, Putin has come out in support of Trump saying that he would end the war in Ukraine immediately. Putin said, yeah, that sounds pretty good, depending on what he says, but yes, that sounds pretty good. Well, we know Trump would offer a pro-Russia plan if he gets back in office, something that would hurt Ukraine. That is autocratic behavior. Mr. Trump intends to bring independent agencies like the Federal Communications Commission, which makes and enforces rules for television and internet companies, and the Federal Trade Commission, which enforces various antitrust and other consumer protection rules against businesses under direct presidential control. I mean, this blows my mind. And I want you to hear this close. The strategy in talking openly about such, quote, paradigm shifting ideas, close quote, before the election, Mr. Vaught said, is to plant a flag, both to shift the debate and to later be able to claim a mandate. He said he was delighted to see few of Mr. Trump's Republican primary rivals defend the norm of Justice Department independence after the former president openly attacked it. In other words, if he is reelected, and this information is all over the place, Project 2025, and he now talks a lot about his Agenda 47. It's no different. We're going to see that in just a moment. It's no different. None. Than Project 2025. Just in different words, the goals are the same. But if he's reelected with all this information in the public sphere like this, they're going to say the American people understood exactly what we were doing. They reelected us. Therefore, they have given us a mandate and a stamp of approval to set up this fascist autocracy and let Mr. Trump be the strong man over it. We can't do that, people. The agenda being pursued has deep roots in the decades-long effort by conservative legal thinkers to undercut what has become known as the administrative state. Agencies that enact regulations aimed at keeping the air and water clean and food, drugs, and consumer products safe, but that cut into business profits. As I told you in my last video, that's much of what this is about. The legal theory rejects the ideal that the government is composed of three separate branches with overlapping powers to check and balance each other. Instead, the theory's adherents argue that Article 2 of the Constitution gives the president complete control of the executive branch, so Congress cannot empower agency heads to make decisions or restrict the president's ability to fire them. Reagan administration lawyers developed the theory as they sought to advance a deregulatory agenda. So again, make Trump a strongman. Give him carte blanche power. Now I want to introduce you to a great book, How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them by Jason Stanley. Dr. Stanley says, fascist movements have been draining. And I think we should read this, and you should read it along with me. Go buy the book. It's a great book. I think we should read it because we're not used to fascism here in this country. We are a democratic republic. We are a democracy. And we're not used to autocracy and all of that. We are used to the ethnic nationalist stuff because this is America. We are used to that. We've dealt with nationalism. We've dealt with racism, systemic racism. But this autocracy thing, that is something we've not dealt with. So we need to familiarize ourselves with what fascism is. And as you read books like this is a great book, you will notice similarities in Trump's behavior and his henchmen and women with those who have tried to impose fascism in the past, including some right here in this country, especially back during the 30s and the 40s of this nation. All right, so fascist movements have been draining swamps for generations. All right, he's using that term sort of sarcastically because that's what you always hear Republicans talking about, draining the swamp. He goes on to explain how that sort of thing is propagandized to create a fascist nation. He goes on to say, publicizing false charges of corruption while engaging in corrupt practices is typical of fascist politics, and anti-corruption campaigns are frequently at the heart of fascist political movements. Fascist politicians characteristically decry corruption in the state they seek to take over, which is bizarre, given that fascist politicians themselves are invariably vastly more corrupt than those they seek to supplant or defeat. Now, isn't that just like Trump? He is always calling someone else corrupt when we see all the time how corrupt he is. Or he's always calling some or one of our institutions corrupt because it's trying to hold him accountable or what have you. So he uses that label of corruption to fire up his base, to fire up his cult, if you will. And then they go after that institution again, which further promotes him to the place that he's ultimately trying to get. The undemocratic intent behind fascist propaganda is key. Watch this. Fascist states focus on dismantling the rule of law with the goal of replacing it with the dictates of individual rulers as party bosses. Well, SCOTUS helped with that big time when it gave Trump absolute immunity, which essentially put him above the rule of law. So Professor Stanley here says that the rule of law stands in the way of fascism. So the person who is trying, or the people trying to impose fascism, will always try to do away with the rule of law. A nation that prides itself on being a nation of laws, not men. Well, we saw that turn upside down with that absolute immunity case. He goes on to say it is standard in fascist politics for harsh criticisms of an independent judiciary to occur in the form of accusations of bias, a kind of corruption, critiques that are then used to replace independent judges with ones who will cynically employ the law as a means to protect the interests of the ruling party. That's court packing. And that's what we see happening. And it is something, I'm an attorney, it is something when you walk into a courtroom and you're dealing with someone who has a bias, a judge who has a bias or who's an ideologue, and the law doesn't matter. Only the judge's ideological bent or bias or prejudice. That is a horrible place to be in when you're fighting for your client and you got a judge like that. The only thing you can try to do is get the judge recused, right? Which is hard to do. In the name of rooting out corruption and supposed bias, fascist politicians attack and diminish the institutions that might otherwise check their power. In Book 8 of Plato's Republic, Socrates argues that people are not naturally led to self-governance, but rather seek a strong leader to follow. Democracy, by permitting freedom of speech, opens the door for a demagogue to exploit the people's need for a strongman. The strongman will use this freedom to prey on the people's resentments and fears. Once the strongman seizes power, he will end democracy, replacing it with tyranny. In short, Book 8 of the Republic argues that democracy is a self-undermining system whose very ideas lead to its own demise. We are literally experiencing that as I speak. Fascist ideology then takes advantage of a human tendency to organize society hierarchically, and fascist politicians represent the myths that legitimized their hierarchies as immutable facts. Their principle, listen closely, especially us African American people, fascism is not good for racial minorities. He goes on to say, for the fascists, the principle of equality is a denial of natural law, which sets certain traditions, those of the more powerful, over others. The natural law allegedly places men over women and members of the chosen nation of the fascists over other groupings. Fascists do not like equality because it is opposite of natural law as they want natural law and explain natural law to be. Natural law basically means that the natural law, the way God sort of created things, is for one class or group of people to be over another. And most often, that class or group or ethnicity or race that is supposed to be up top is the white race. And those on the bottom, most especially, is the black race. That's what fascists believe. That's why Hitler killed 6 million Jews, because he propagated that Jews were, according to natural law, inferior and worthy of death. And sadly, Germany bought what Hitler said. We cannot allow that sort of thing to happen in our nation. Now, I'm going to take you to Trump's Agenda 47, and we'll see that it pretty much mirrors what Project 2025 says. All right, so here we go. We're on Trump's website, Agenda 47, and his supporters say, forget Project 2025, go to Trump's website to see what his Agenda 47 has to say. Well, it's saying the same thing. We read up top, President Trump's plan to dismantle the deep state and return power to the American people. That's the same thing as Project 2025. Let's read a little bit of this. President Donald J. Trump announced a bold plan to return power back to the American people by cleaning out the deep state, firing rogue bureaucrats and career politicians, and targeting government corruption. The plan will also end the ongoing weaponization of the justice system that targets its political enemies simply because of their political or religious beliefs. That has not happened to Trump, but that's what he's going to do, for sure. President Trump's plan to shatter the deep state and return power to the American people. Quote, I will shatter the deep state and restore government that is controlled by the people, close quote. Clean out the deep state. President Trump has announced a 10-point plan to dismantle the deep state and reclaim our democracy from Washington corruption. He just calls it the deep state. Project 2025 calls it the administrative state, but they're all talking about doing the same thing. Shutting down, basically firing a lot of the folks who work in these federal agencies and replacing them with Trump's political appointees, folks who will do anything that he says do, and not be like some of the folks in his last administration who would not do everything he said. The crowd that he's bringing will do precisely what he wants them to do. So we're not going to read all of that. I just wanted you to see that this is no different than Project 2025. Instead of administrative state, the deep state. And besides, as we already said, SCOTUS is already severely weakened federal agencies anyway when they overrule the Chevron deference. All right, so we cannot allow Trump to get reelected. We must work our fingers to the bone to keep him out of the White House, because we see that he clearly intends to establish himself as an autocrat, and the people around him, they want that as well, because it will benefit the corporations. It will allow white supremacists to continue to attack civil rights, to continue taking the country back to a time that was not good for our nation, especially for us African Americans. It will just create chaos. Just, if you think we had chaos the first time in his first administration, we will have it like never before. And I'm praying that our country makes it out of this without bloodshed, because I played for you a video by Kevin Roberts the last time where he said that they're taking back their country and and the country's in the middle of a second revolutionary war. And what does he mean by that? Well, he means that they're fighting for freedom, freedom from progressives, freedom from liberals, freedom from wokeism, so that they can get back to doing what they like to do, which is, again, to exercise white male dominance without being encumbered with civil rights laws, with regulations, etc. So we got to stand against that, you all. We got to stand against that and do everything we can to prevent Trump from getting reelected. That will be the final condition of him, MAGA, Project 2025, the GOP, from establishing a fascist country with Trump as the autocrat or dictator. All right. Thank you for watching this video from start to finish. Please share it, like it, comment on it, help us get the word out that there is nothing more important right now for America than keeping Donald Trump from getting reelected. And as we saw a moment ago, it's real important for us African Americans as well, because according to fascism, it is the natural law for black folks to be on the bottom and whites to be on the top. I am Attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. Thank you for tuning in, and until the next time, peace. Huge wealth transfer in the last several decades from working class people to the ultra rich. Working class people have gotten poor, and the ultra rich have gotten much, much wealthier. And so it is really dubious to hear these people complain about spending some money to try to help the least of them, to try to help the most vulnerable of them, while at the same time they're giving $2, $3, $4 trillion tax cuts to the most wealthiest. So they want to starve the education department, which will hurt the most vulnerable in our country. That's what they want to do. They want to starve it to death so that it dies. And meanwhile, sort of redirecting that money to white students, white school districts. All right, stay with me. So now that she has laid out her argument for why the Department of Education, or at least part of her argument for why the Department of Education should no longer be in existence, that it should be sunsetted, that it should be dismantled, she then begins to talk about reforms that should be made immediately upon Trump's election. Now, that's the thing I want you to understand. If Donald Trump wins, he does not come into the office with just his family. He comes into the office with that manual under his arm and a whole bunch of white conservatives that he's going to hire and he's going to put into these positions. He's going to fire, according to Project 2025, he's going to fire a bunch of the folks who are working there now. Some of them, quite a few of them, are black people because, after all, D.C., the District of Columbia, has a whole lot of African Americans, and many of them work those government jobs. So Project 2025 intends to get rid of them and replace them with what Project 2025 calls Mr. and Mrs. Smith from the heartland of America, from rural parts of America. In other words, white conservatives. And put those people in those positions, and then we'll see just how the Department of Education, the Department of Justice, and so on begins to act very hostile toward issues of justice and equity and diversity and inclusivity and so on. You follow me? All right, so some of the reforms that she is advocating is, let's look at the first one, advanced education freedom. Now, I want you to pay close attention to what I'm about to read. Empowering families to choose among a diverse set of education opinions is key to reform and improved outcomes, and it can be achieved without establishing a new federal program. For example, portability of existing federal education spending to fund families directly or allowing federal tax credits to encourage voluntary contributions to K-12 education savings accounts managed by charitable nonprofits could significantly advance education choice. That's page 322. What is she saying? She's saying, as I told you in the beginning, redirect funds from the Department of Education directly to families, white families. Let's be straight up. Very few African-American families will get these funds. If she thought that African-American families would get these funds, she would not be advocating for this type of reform. You see, again, these folks have hated efforts by the Department of Education to try to lift black students. And that has been a big part of the Department of Education's mission ever since President Jimmy Carter helped develop the current day Department of Education. And they've resented it. We're basically fighting a fight that never ended, to be honest with you. We have been fighting this fight throughout slavery, the Civil War, Jim Crow. It has never relented. We go from Reconstruction to redemption. Reconstruction is when we, after slavery, began to make some progress. But that was short-lived because redemption arose where white Southerners began to implement Jim Crow laws and codes and so forth. So we've gone back and forth, back and forth. During the Obama administration, you could say it was somewhat of a Reconstruction period. But then what happened? Trump happened because he was their answer to Obama. And so then we started going through another redemption period. And that period, they're trying to extend that period. They're trying to codify and institutionalize Trumpism. All his bombast, all his white supremacy, all his hatred, his racism, they want that written into the law. They want that embedded in the federal government, you see, in the education systems. So that's why we got to fight this. And we fight this, as I said earlier, by voting, by keeping Trump and Project 2025 out of office. And right now, that means voting for Kamala Harris. All right, let's go back. So here's another reform effort that I want to read to you, and you'll see exactly how these policies are hateful to black kids. Restore state and local control over education funding, as I just explained. As Washington begins to downsize its intervention in education, existing funding should be sent to states as grants over which they have full control, enabling states to put federal funding toward any lawful education purpose under state law. Page 322. So just as I explained, that is a huge part of what they want to do. They champion what's called states' rights. And we have always had an issue with states' rights as African Americans because that put us under the thumb, oftentimes, of racist, bigoted, white supremacist people who advocated policies to harm us. And quite often, the only way that we could get any relief, any justice, was looking toward the federal government. So they have been just very anxious, at least since the Brown versus Board of Education case, to get the federal government out of education policy and use that money to help already wealthy, white, predominantly white school districts. And it really, really concerns me, as it should you as well. Let's go back to the screen here so that I can continue showing you why these policies are very harmful and hateful to black kids. Eliminate student loan forgiveness. Taxpayers should expect their investments in higher education to generate economic productivity. When the federal government lends money to individuals for a post-secondary education, taxpayers should expect those borrowers to repay. So basically, again, do nothing to help working people, people who most often have to take out loans to get a college education. But this crowd of people, all they're concerned about are the richest of the rich, who is bankrolling most of these conservatives. We saw that with Clarence Thomas, who has made millions of dollars sitting on the court championing the causes and grievances of white conservatives. So no student loan forgiveness, but again, a $2 trillion tax cut to the richest of the rich, that's okay. That's fine. And some of you all are young and you don't understand where that thinking comes from. Well, this thinking is called trickle-down economics. And it took root back during the Reagan administration. And incidentally, it was the Heritage Foundation, the same group that developed Project 2025, that developed a whole lot of those Reagan policies. So they want those policies to continue enriching the richest and impoverishing the poorest, the working people. All right, so no student loan forgiveness, but Trump definitely will give his rich buddies and himself lots of tax breaks. What else? Stop enforcing civil rights laws to help black students. All right, enforcement of civil rights should be based on a proper understanding of those laws, rejecting gender ideology and critical race theory. Now, they have demonized critical race theory. They have demonized it. They co-opted the term and made it sound like the worst thing since the earth was made. And it's not. This video is not about critical race theory. Otherwise, I will give you some rundown on critical race theory. But let's just say critical race theory started in law schools primarily. The late Professor Derek Bell is sort of the creator and father of critical race theory that simply asks questions about why do we continue to see the disparities and the discrimination and the results in the African American community if we've made all these strides. Why is the system still mistreating, discriminating against African Americans? That's what critical race theory does. And it then just offers some answers to that very question. Like, for example, America is systemically racist. That is one of the proponents of critical race theory, which is, if you're being honest, is undeniable. But anyway, she says here, to enforce civil rights should be done on a proper understanding of civil rights laws. That means this whole colorblind thing that they developed, this whole reverse discrimination thing that they talk about all the time. In other words, it's civil rights from a white perspective, that only white people are being done wrong. So it's that type of civil rights enforcement. Shameful. So the laws that are in place to protect African American children in these schools, she's advocating that we stop enforcing those civil rights laws the way the Biden administration, the Obama administration, and other Democratic administrations have interpreted and enforced those civil rights laws. Send Title I funds to states rather than low-income schools. She keeps saying this over and over and over again, and so therefore that's why we keep reading about it. So on page 325, Dr. Burke says, transfer Title I Part A, which provides federal funding for lower-income school districts, to the Department of Health and Human Services, specifically the Administration for Children and Families. It should be administered as a no-strings-attached formula block grant. So Title I funds that tries to equalize low-income school districts that serve a lot of African-American children, those funds should now be retargeted, redirected away from those schools. I mean, this is sinister. And they're very open about it. So if Trump gets elected, this is what they're going to do. They're going to start taking money away from your children's school district and start sending it as block grants back to states. And with no conditions. Use the money however you want to use it, school districts. And Ron DeSantis, use the money however you want to use it. Greg Abbott, use the money however you want to use it. Mark Robinson, if he's elected, use the money however you want to use it. And we know that's not going to be to the advantage of African American students. She also advocates sending IDEA funds to states rather than low-income schools. Most IDEA funding should be converted into a no-strings formula block grant targeted at students with disabilities and distributed directly to local education agencies by Health and Human Services Administration for Community Living. So, I mean, repeatedly, they're saying dismantle the Department of Education and send the money back to the states. Send the money to Greg Abbott. Send the money to Ron DeSantis. So they can do whatever they want to do with it. And by the way, Texas already has a despicable record for the way it treats children. This state I live in, has the highest, the last I read, the highest level of uninsured children in the country. So take the Department of Education funding and sending it to these states is a horrible idea. Now, school discipline. School discipline. This is an area where we see a lot of discrimination. We see a lot of discrimination in the area of school discipline. It is the reason why African American students, especially African American male students, are disproportionately suspended, expelled, and just basically kicked out of school. And I know this personally because I am a high school dropout. I didn't make it beyond the 10th grade. And in the high school that I went to, back in the late 70s, the principal and assistant principal, the assistant principal, by the way, was an African-American man who apologized to me later. They basically, their goal was to just basically get rid of all the black guys. So nearly every black dude in my community dropped out of high school. Very, very few of us graduated. I didn't graduate, I got a GED. The rest of them, many of them, never went beyond the 8th or 9th grade. And this was, again, in the late 70s. And that was because of the just terrible disciplinary policies of the school district. The particular principal that we had, his name was Rick Denning. I believe his last name was Denning. He was unjustifiably tough on black male students. Didn't try to do anything whatsoever to help us graduate high school. Just kick us out, kick us out, kick us out, kick us out. So the school discipline issue is something I write about in my book a lot because I know, as a former teacher, how school districts get rid of young black males, especially with these heavy-handed school discipline policies. All right, so let's look at what she says. All right, Project 2025's nefarious plan for school discipline. Assuring a safe and orderly school environment should be a primary consideration for school leaders and district administrators. Unfortunately, federal overreach has pushed many school leaders to prioritize the pursuit of racial parity in school discipline indicators, such as detentions, suspensions, and expulsions, over student safety. In 2024, the Obama administration issued a Dear Colleague letter that muddied the standards for civil rights enforcement under Title VI for student discipline cases, page 334. So what is she saying? She's saying that the Obama administration issued a letter encouraging schools to be fair in their school discipline policies. Because, as I write in my book, there are many schools that implement school discipline policies that disproportionately result in African American students being suspended over and over and over again. And when that happens, you're going to cause those kids to drop out. You're basically pushing them out. And the Obama administration knew this was going on, as do any of us in this space. And the Obama administration wrote a letter and essentially encouraged schools to be fair. Try to find some alternatives. Don't kick those young men out, because essentially you're putting them on the school to prison pipeline. You're putting them in a situation where they're going to end up in the streets and themselves become victims of crime and violence, or they're going to victimize others. So the better thing to do is to try to find alternatives to constant suspensions and expulsions and so on. So we thank former President Obama for doing his best to try to help schools look at it from a different perspective. And as we see here, Project 2025 sees all of that as a nuisance, and they intend to go into office and do away with it all. Now, what happened is, before I move on, what happened is when Trump got elected in 2016, he basically overturned and repealed and deleted a whole lot of the stuff that Obama did. But then Biden got elected, and so Trump is going to go in office and try to get rid of all the civil rights stuff and all of the encouragement from the Biden administration to try to work with these black kids rather than kicking them out of school. So that's why we cannot allow to let Trump and Project 2025 and the GOP back into office. We got to vote. I don't want you to feel hopeless and helpless, because ultimately we got the power. And how do you know? Let me show you how we know we got the power. Because Trump is always trying to mislead us, trying to get us to vote for him or not to vote at all. He focuses on the African American community, because oftentimes it is African Americans in these battleground states like Georgia and Michigan, Detroit and Atlanta and places like that, that if he can get, with the help of black conservatives, if he can get those folks there in Atlanta, those black folks in Atlanta, in Detroit, if he can get them to hate the Democrats, therefore not voting, if they can get them to hate Kamala, she's not black, she just turned black, she sent a lot of black men to prison. If they can get blacks in those areas thinking that and staying away from the polls, then they will be able to more likely get elected again to then turn around and harm black people. All right? Let's read this. OCR, that is the Office of Civil Rights, leveraged federal civil rights investigations as policy enforcement tools. These investigations could only end when school districts agreed to adopt lenient discipline policies, commonly known as restorative justice. Academic studies, as well as students and teacher surveys, suggest that academics and school climate have been harmed substantially by this push. That is crap. These policies of the OCR, the Office of Civil Rights, to try to get these schools to be fair, to be equitable, to be compassionate with African American students, they don't make the school environment less safe. They don't make the school environment less productive to academic excellence. No, they help save the lives of some of these children. They help keep some of these kids in school. What do you expect from a kid who, again, is living in a home where the father is not involved, where the mother's having to work a couple jobs, can't be home with the kids, and so the kids are exposed to all sorts of things? You see, the average white kid doesn't go through this. And where does all this stuff come from that we see plaguing the black community? It comes from a legacy of racial oppression. It comes from 250 years of slavery. And then Jim Crow that just ended about 65 years ago. That's where it comes from. Our community has been damaged and harmed by 400 years of white supremacy and racial oppression. And we live amongst a people, white conservatives, white supremacy, who want to take no responsibility for that and who don't want to do anything to try and help correct that, namely with reparations. No, they just say there's something innately wrong about black people and black culture, etc. So she casts aspersions. So she speaks bad about efforts to try to help these young men and young women in school. She says it's been bad for schools. So they want to get rid of all of this. The very programs that the Department of Education implemented to help our students, our children, they will get rid of them. And can you imagine then, some of these programs are saving some people. Well, they won't be there to save any of our children if Trump gets back in office. Then there's the special education part. Do you not know that special education has a disproportionate percentage of black students, black males in particular? And then if you contrast special education with gifted education, you got to search long and hard to find black students, especially black males, in gifted education. So you have a whole lot of black males in special education and very, very, very few in gifted education. Why is that? Because of what I explained to you from the beginning, systemic racism and the legacy of racial oppression that we're talking about. It is not because African Americans have some sort of inferior intellectual or psychological or mental gene. That's not the issue at all. Not at all. There are some nefarious discriminatory practices that occur in society, in this country, in the classroom, in the neighborhood, on the job, that results in more African American students, males especially, being placed in special education. Sometimes what's merely behavioral issues will cause a child to be placed in special education. And it's not that the kid has a mental issue. The kid's behavior is not what it should be. That doesn't mean the kid should be placed in special education. Now, let me say this. Special education can be a wonderful place for kids who have mental health issues because they get specialized care, a specialized education plan. So it can be great when it's needed, but when it's not needed, it can become a stigma. It can cause a child to think that he or she is not an intelligent child. I mean, it can be bad. If it's needed, yes. But in many, many, many cases, it's not needed. They just put those kids there to get rid of them. I'm talking about black kids in particular. So Dr. Burke says, students should never be denied access to special education services because of their race or ethnicity. But this is happening in school districts across the country thanks to the Obama administration's equity in IDEA regulation. That is such crap. The Obama administration's focus on being equitable, his encouragement of schools to seek equity in schools is not the reason why black kids are being placed in special education. His suggested equity programs were put in place to prevent the disproportionate placement of black kids in special education or suspended and expelled. It's just like these people to twist a thing, to pervert a thing. This was not the intent of the regulation, but it is an inevitable byproduct of its flawed assumptions. Well, at least she acknowledged that that was not the intent, but I strongly disagree with her that that's even the byproduct. The Obama administration looked at the racial statistics on special education, as I have and outlined in my book, and made two assumptions: that African American students were disproportionately overrepresented. That's not an assumption, that is a fact. And that this overrepresentation constituted a harm that required federal pressure to ameliorate. He was right on both fronts. He was right that African American students were overrepresented in special education and that this was a harm to them because some didn't need to be there, as I just explained. So this is another area of public education where racism, systemic racism, has a horrible, hateful impact on black students. And what the Obama administration did to try to address it, she's demonizing it. What the Biden-Harris administration is doing to try to address it, they will gut that as well. School districts deemed to overrepresent minority students in special education assignment or in discipline amongst special education students are tagged by their state education agencies as engaging in significant disproportionality. It is true. And are required to reallocate 15% of their IDEA Part B money into coordinated early intervening services that are intended to address the root causes of disproportionality. In practice, this can mean raiding special education funding to pay for CRT-inspired equity consultants and professional development. All junk, what she just said. Page 336 of this manual. All junk. That ain't taking money away from special education program. And even if it does take some money from special education program, it is needed to try to keep African American students out of special education if they don't need it. Because again, there's the stigma of that. And secondly, they're in there taking spots that kids who really need special education could have. But again, they're going to twist it. They're going to try to pervert it. This is especially problematic given that both of the assumptions behind equity in IDEA are flawed. They're not. Special education services provide extra assistance to students. They do not harm them. And according to the most rigorous research on the subject, conducted by Penn State's Paul Morgan, black students are actually underrepresented in special education once adequate statistical controls are made. That means that this regulation effectively further depresses the provision of valuable services to an already underserved group. Bull. I did the research. I put it in my book. The Obama administration certainly did the research and took actions upon it as well. What she just said is total malarkey. Black kids are overrepresented in special education, and many of them should not be there. If they need to be there, it is a wonderful plan, a wonderful program, and can help kids. But if they don't need to be there, given the impression that we have a disproportionate percentage of kids, black kids, that have mental health issues, that's not true. That's not factual. It is the way these kids are often identified and placed into these programs. So yeah, if black kids need to be in special education, it is a wonderful plan, as I just said. But if not, we need to keep them out of there. Where we really need them is in gifted education. Because in gifted education, they're going to be challenged to do their best, to go home and study, to focus on academic excellence. So that's one of the little secrets, little tips that I want to share with you. Get your kids in AP classes. All right, that's where you want them. Okay? So those are some of the policies that Project 2025 intends to implement if Trump is reelected. So many times we get distracted with all of Trump's foolishness. He's a master at getting us off. Again, talking about Kamala Harris's race. That's just a distraction to take our focus away from the policies that these people will implement if he is reelected. Let's stay focused. Let's stay focused on policies, not personalities and distractions. Policies. And the policies of Project 2025 are horrible across the board for Black Americans. And what I just showed you are the education policies that they intend to implement if Trump is reelected. How do we keep them from doing that? By voting, and voting specifically for Kamala Harris. Whatever issues you got with her, put them to the side. Right now, this is about protecting our democracy and defending civil rights. All right, I am Attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. This is the content we bring you on a weekly basis. I appreciate you listening to this video from start to finish, and I trust that it has opened your eyes on some things. Thank you, and until the next time, peace.